Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. Before we start today's case, I want to ask for your support by subscribing to my channel. Your support is very important to me, so please subscribe to follow more cases and encourage us. Click the like button and let's get into the case. The morning sun cast long shadows across Myrtle Beach as Jake Thompson waded into the cool Atlantic waters. At 19, with his sophomore year at Coastal Carolina University behind him, Jake had eagerly anticipated this weekend getaway with his three closest friends. The past semester had been brutal. Organic chemistry had nearly broken him. But now, with the warmth of early June wrapping around him like a blanket, those worries seemed distant. "Come on, man," Tyler called from further down the beach, his lanky frame silhouetted against the rising sun. "We've got the whole day ahead of us," Jake waved back, letting the water lap against his calves. It was barely 7:30 a.m., early enough that they had beaten the notorious Myrtle Beach crowds. The four friends had arrived late the previous night, crashing in a modest rental condo that Tyler's parents owned just 3 blocks from the shore. The plan was simple: 2 days of sun, surf, and forgetting about their academic responsibilities. "Water's perfect," Jake shouted back, splashing forward until the gentle waves reached his knees. The beach stretched for miles in either direction, the famous Grand Strand living up to its reputation. To his left, the Myrtle Beach boardwalk stood quiet, its shops and restaurants still hours from opening. In the distance, he could make out the silhouette of the sky wheel against the brightening sky. Jake took another step forward, feeling the sand shift beneath his feet. The sensation was oddly comforting, a reminder of his childhood summers spent on these very shores with his parents before their divorce. Those memories had drawn him to attend college nearby, though he rarely found time during the academic year to visit the beach. "Dude, I think I see dolphins," came another shout, this time from Ethan, who was standing on the shore with binoculars. Their fourth friend, Marcus, was still sleeping back at the condo, having stayed up later than the others playing video games. Jake squinted toward the horizon, seeing nothing but the gentle roll of waves. He moved deeper, the water now at his waist, enjoying the coolness against his skin. The sandbar beneath him sloped gently, then seemed to level off. Perfect wading depth. What Jake couldn't see, what none of them could see, was the 7-foot bull shark that had been patrolling this stretch of coastline since dawn. 3 miles offshore, Captain Ray Donovan guided his charter fishing boat through the calm morning waters. Yet 62, with skin weathered by decades at sea, Ray knew these waters better than most. He'd been running charters out of Murrell's Inlet for nearly 30 years, developing an almost supernatural sense for where the fish would be biting. "We're going to hit the sweet spot today, folks," he announced to the family of 4 who had booked his boat for the morning. The Petersons, David and Karen, with their teenage sons Josh and Kyle, were visiting from Ohio, eager for their first deep-sea fishing experience. "What are we likely to catch, Captain?" David asked, adjusting his new fishing hat, the price tag still dangling from the brim. Ray chuckled. "This time of year, Spanish mackerel, bluefish, maybe some king mackerel if we're lucky." He paused, scanning the horizon with practiced eyes. "Been some reports of bull sharks in the area too." "Sharks?" Karen's voice pitched higher. "Are they dangerous?" "Bulls can be ornery, no doubt about that," Ray said, slowing the engine as they approached his favorite fishing spot. "They're one of the few sharks that can tolerate fresh water. Sometimes they'll swim right up the inlets into the freshwater rivers." He pointed toward the distant shore. "They like to patrol the sandbars too, hunting for food." "Could they attack swimmers?" Josh asked, his voice a mix of fear and excitement. Ray's expression grew serious. "Any shark can, if the conditions are right. Bulls, great whites, tigers, they're the big 3 when it comes to attacks on humans." He secured the wheel and moved to help them prepare their lines. "But attacks are rare. You're more likely to get struck by lightning than bit by a shark." What Ray didn't mention was the unusual pattern he'd noticed over the past week. The commercial fishermen had been talking about it at the marina. Fewer fish in their usual spots and multiple sightings of bull sharks closer to shore than normal. The previous afternoon, he'd spotted one himself, a large female, probably 7 feet long, circling the sandbar that ran parallel to Myrtle Beach. He'd called it in to the beach patrol, of course. They always took such reports seriously. But with no confirmation of the shark remaining in the area and the busy summer season just beginning, Ray knew they wouldn't close the beaches based on a single sighting. As the Petersons cast their lines, Ray's gaze drifted toward the shore, now a thin line on the horizon. Something didn't feel right today. The water was clear, the fish were biting, but Ray couldn't shake the uneasy feeling in his gut, the same feeling that had saved him more than once during hurricane season. 200 yards from where Jake stood, the bull shark moved through the water with efficient grace. She was a mature female, nearly 7 feet long and weighing over 500 pounds. Her powerful tail propelled her forward in smooth, deliberate motions, her dorsal fin occasionally breaking the surface before disappearing again beneath the waves. Bull sharks were not seasonal visitors to South Carolina's coast. They were year-round residents. Unlike their more famous cousins, the great whites, bulls could regulate their bodies to survive in both salt and fresh water, making them uniquely adaptable predators. This particular female had been patrolling these waters for nearly a decade, ranging from the outer banks of North Carolina down to the Florida coast, following the migration patterns of her preferred prey. The previous winter had been unusually warm, disrupting the normal movements of the fish she hunted. The baitfish schools had scattered, forcing predators like her to venture closer to shore in search of food. For 3 days, she had been swimming along this sandbar, guided by the electromagnetic sensors in her snout that detected the minute electrical impulses of potential prey. She wasn't hunting humans. In fact, humans were not part of her natural diet. But in the murky, churning waters along a sandbar, where visibility was limited and vibrations traveled far, distinctions blurred. A splashing human and a struggling fish created similar vibrations. And bull sharks, unlike some of their more cautious relatives, were known to investigate potential prey with an exploratory bite, a bite delivered with jaws powerful enough to crush turtle shells. As she cruised the sandbar, her lateral line, sensors detected vibrations ahead, something moving through the water. In her world of electromagnetic pulses and pressure changes, this registered as potential prey. She changed course slightly, the instincts honed by millions of years of evolution, guiding her toward the disturbance. Jake had moved parallel to the shore following the sandbar. The water remained at waist height, perfect for wading. He'd left Tyler and Ethan behind, seeking a few moments of solitude before the beach became crowded with tourists. 20 yards ahead, he spotted something floating in the water, a piece of driftwood, its surface bleached white by sun and salt. "Hey guys, check this out," he called, though he wasn't sure if his friends could hear him from this distance. Jake moved toward the driftwood, thinking it might make a cool souvenir. The first indications something was wrong came not as a sighting but as a feeling, an inexplicable sense that he was not alone in the water. Jake paused, scanning the surface. Around him, nothing but gentle waves and the occasional glint of morning sunlight. Still, the feeling persisted, raising goosebumps on his arms despite the warm water. He took another step and felt something brush against his calf, something solid and rough. Jake froze, his heart suddenly pounding. Fish, he told himself, just a curious fish. Then he saw it, a triangular fin breaking the surface 15 feet away, moving with purpose in his direction. The realization hit him with paralyzing clarity. Shark? Jake's mind raced through everything he'd ever heard about shark encounters. Don't panic, don't splash, back away slowly, face the animal. But academic knowledge was one thing. Applying it while standing waist-deep in water with a shark approaching was another matter entirely. "Shark!" he shouted, hoping his friends would hear, would call for help. "There's a shark!" On the shore, Tyler looked up from his phone, squinting against the sun. "What's he yelling about?" Ethan lowered his binoculars. "I think he said, 'shark.'" There was a moment of uncertainty before realization dawned on both of them. "Shark!" Ethan bellowed, jumping to his feet. "Jake, get out of the water!" Jake began backing toward shore, keeping his eyes on the fin that was now circling wider, almost as if sizing him up. His legs felt leaden, movement sluggish against the resistance of the water. 10 more yards to where he could touch the bottom safely. 8 yards. 6. The fin disappeared. For a terrifying moment, Jake couldn't see the shark at all. The water around him, so clear minutes before, now seemed opaque, full of shadows and possibilities. Then a flash of movement to his right, the shark changing direction, moving not away but toward him with frightening speed. Jake turned to run, forgetting in his panic the cardinal rule of shark encounters. The sudden movement, the splashing. To the predator below, these were the actions of prey. The shark struck from below and behind, its powerful jaws clamping around Jake's right thigh. The initial sensation wasn't pain, but pressure. Enormous, crushing pressure. Then came the pull, a force so strong it yanked Jake under the surface. Water closed over his head as the shark began to shake him. A behavior evolved to tear chunks from prey too large to swallow whole. Underwater, time seemed to slow. Jake could see the shark now. Not the sleek, torpedo-shaped great white of movies, but a bulkier creature with a blunt snout and eyes that seemed to regard him with neither malice nor mercy, but with the cold efficiency of nature's perfect predator. Its rough skin abraded his hands as he instinctively pushed against it, trying to free himself from those terrible jaws. The pain hit then, white-hot and all-consuming. Jake opened his mouth to scream, but only swallowed seawater. His lungs burned. His vision began to tunnel. In that moment, Jake Thompson was certain he was going to die. Then, as suddenly as it had grabbed him, the shark released its grip. Perhaps it had determined Jake wasn't its usual prey. Perhaps the taste of neoprene from Jake's swim shorts had been unappealing. Whatever the reason, the shark backed away, circling once more before disappearing into deeper water. Jake broke the surface, gasping for air, his right leg on fire. "Help!" he screamed, voice raw with pain and fear. "Help me!" On shore, Tyler and Ethan were already in motion. Tyler dialing 911 as Ethan sprinted toward the water. A few early morning beachgoers, alerted by the commotion, stood frozen in shock. "Stay. Back," Ethan yelled at them. "There's a shark." He waded in up to his knees, then hesitated, scanning the water for any sign of the predator. 20 feet away, Jake was struggling to stay afloat, his movements growing weaker. The water around him was turning red. Ethan made a decision. Shark be damned. He wasn't going to watch his friend bleed out. He plunged forward, swimming with powerful strokes until he reached Jake. "I've got you," he gasped, wrapping an arm around Jake's chest. "I've got you, man, hold on." Jake could barely respond, shock already setting in. His right leg trailed uselessly in the water, blood pulsing from the deep lacerations that wrapped around his thigh. Each wave that passed beneath them brought fresh agony. On shore, Tyler was shouting into his phone. "Myrtle Beach near 15th Avenue North, shark attack. My friend is bleeding badly." He paced frantically, watching as Ethan struggled to drag Jake toward shore. "Yes, we're bringing him. In now, please hurry." By the time Ethan reached the shallows, 2 more beachgoers had overcome their fear to help. Together, they carried Jake onto the sand, laying him down gently. Someone, a retired nurse on vacation as it happened, took charge, instructing Tyler to elevate Jake's injured leg while she fashioned a tourniquet from a beach towel. "Pressure," she commanded, placing Tyler's hands on the makeshift bandage. "Keep pressure on it." To Ethan, she said, "Keep talking to him. Don't let him lose consciousness." Ethan knelt beside his friend, whose face had gone alarmingly pale. "Jake, stay with us, man. Help is coming." His voice cracked. "Tell me about that girl from your economics class, the one you wouldn't shut up about." Jake's eyes, unfocused and glazed with pain, found Ethan's face. "Emma," he whispered, lips trembling. "Her name is Emma." "That's right, Emma. You were going to ask her out when fall semester starts, remember?" Jake tried to nod, but even that small movement seemed to cost him tremendous effort. "Cold," he murmured. "Why am I so cold?" The nurse exchanged a worried glance with Tyler. "Shock," she said quietly. "We need that ambulance now." As if on cue, the wail of sirens cut through the morning air. Beach patrol vehicles appeared at the nearest access point, followed moments later by an ambulance. Paramedics rushed across the sand carrying equipment and a stretcher. The crowd that had gathered parted to make way. In the commotion, few noticed the beach patrol officers scanning the water with binoculars, searching for any sign of the shark. One officer spoke into his radio, and red flags began appearing along the beach, the universal signal for dangerous water conditions. As the paramedics worked to stabilize Jake, a police officer approached Tyler and Ethan. "I need to know exactly what happened," he said. Notepad ready. Tyler, his hands still stained with Jake's blood, struggled to find words. It was Ethan who answered, his voice hollow with shock. "Bull shark, I think. Maybe 7 feet long. It came out of nowhere." "To you?" Officer nodded grimly. "We've had reports from local fishermen about bull sharks in the area this past week." He glanced toward the water. "Beach patrol will keep everyone out of the water until we're sure it's moved on." "Will Jake be okay?" Tyler asked, watching. As the paramedics lifted his friend onto the stretcher, the officer's expression softened. They're taking him to Grand Strand Medical. It's the trauma center for the area. They've handled shark attacks before. He placed a hand on Tyler's shoulder. You should call his parents. As the ambulance pulled away, siren wailing, Ethan and Tyler stood motionless on the beach. The sun, now fully risen, illuminated a scene transformed from vacation paradise to nightmare in the span of minutes. A few yards away, the water lapped peacefully against the shore, giving no indication of the predator that still patrolled the depths. 300 yards offshore, the bull shark continued her methodical patrol of the sandbar. The brief encounter with the human had been an anomaly, an exploratory bite rather than a determined attack. Sharks seldom preyed on humans intentionally. They preferred the fat-rich seals and fish that constituted their natural diet. This particular shark, driven by instinct and hunger, would continue her search for proper prey. She would remain in the area for several more days before moving south, following the coastal currents and the schools of fish that sustained her. She would never know the impact of that single bite, how it had irrevocably altered a human life in seconds. To the bull shark, it had simply been another day in the endless cycle of survival, a momentary deviation from the pattern of hunting, eating, and moving that defined her existence. To Jake Thompson, it would become the dividing line between before and after, the moment that would shape the remainder of his life in ways he could not yet comprehend. The emergency department at Grand Strand Medical Center operated with controlled chaos as the trauma team prepared for Jake's arrival. Dr. Alicia Chen, attending trauma surgeon, had been alerted minutes earlier. This would be the third shark attack she'd treated in her 15-year career at Grand Strand. Not common, but frequent enough that protocols were well established. "What's our ETA?" she asked the charge nurse, pulling her hair back into a tight ponytail. 2 minutes. Beach Patrol reports a bull shark attack. Male victim approximately 20 years old, with severe lacerations to the right thigh. Significant blood loss. Patient in shock. Dr. Chen nodded, mentally preparing for what was to come. Bull shark attacks were particularly devastating due to the species' powerful jaws and serrated teeth, which created jagged wounds that tore through muscle and severed blood vessels. The priority would be stopping the bleeding, then assessing damage to nerves and tendons. When the ambulance doors opened, Jake was barely conscious. His skin had taken on a grey pallor, his lips tinged blue. The beach towel tourniquet was soaked through with blood. BP 8050. Heart rate 130 and thready, the paramedic reported as they wheeled Jake into Trauma Room 1. 2 large-bore IVs established in the field, 1 liter normal saline running. Patient identified as Jake Thompson, 19 years old, no known allergies or medical history. Dr. Chen moved quickly, cutting away the blood-soaked swim trunks to reveal the full extent of the injury. The bite wound wrapped nearly halfway around Jake's thigh, a classic bull shark attack pattern. The wounds were deep, exposing muscle and bone in places. The femoral artery appeared intact, the only piece of good news so far. "Type and cross for 6 units packed red cells," she ordered. "Start the massive transfusion protocol. I need platelets and plasma too." To the resident beside her, she added, "Get ultrasound in here now. I want to check for vascular injury beyond what we can see." As nurses hung blood products and antibiotics, Dr. Chen began the meticulous process of examining the wound. Shark bites presented unique challenges. Unlike clean cuts or even other animal bites, shark teeth created jagged, multi-directional tears. Worse, their mouths harbored numerous bacteria, making infection a major concern. "We'll need to debride extensively," she told her team. "Irrigate with high-pressure saline and hydrogen peroxide. I want cultures before we start antibiotics." But he's getting Unicin, Flagyl, and doxycycline empirically. In the waiting room, Tyler and Ethan sat in shocked silence. They had followed the ambulance in Tyler's car, calling Jake's parents on the way. His mother had broken down on the phone. His father had gone eerily quiet before saying he would be on the next flight from Charlotte. Marcus, roused from sleep by their frantic calls, had joined them at the hospital, still trying to process what had happened. "I don't understand," he kept saying. "We've been swimming at Myrtle Beach since we were kids. Nothing like this ever happens." But it did happen. Rarely but regularly enough that the coastal hospitals were prepared for it. South Carolina typically recorded 1 or 2 shark attacks per year, most of them minor. Serious attacks like Jake's occurred perhaps once every few years. The odds were overwhelmingly in a swimmer's favor, millions of beach visits for every attack. But statistics offered little comfort when your friend, was currently fighting for his life in a trauma room. 4 hours later, Dr. Chen emerged, surgical cap still on her head. The three friends stood immediately, faces etched with worry. "Jake is stable," she began, choosing her words carefully. "The good news is that the femoral artery, the main blood vessel in the thigh, was spared. That likely saved his life." She paused. "The damage to the muscle tissue was extensive. We've repaired what we could, but he'll need additional surgeries." Will he be able to walk again?" Tyler asked, voicing the question they were all afraid to ask. Dr. Chen's expression remained professional but compassionate. "It's too early to make definitive prognoses, but yes, I believe he will walk again. He's young and was in excellent health before the injury, which works in his favor. However, I want to be clear that his recovery will be long and challenging. He'll need extensive physical therapy." "Can we see him?" Ethan asked. "He's in recovery." "Oh no, once he's moved to the ICU, you can visit briefly. One at a time, family first when they arrive." She checked her watch. "That will be in about an hour. I suggest you get something to eat in the meantime. It's going to be a long day." As Dr. Chen walked away, the three friends looked at each other, the reality of the situation finally sinking. In their carefree beach weekend had transformed into a vigil at a hospital, waiting to see if their friend would recover from wounds inflicted by one of nature's most perfect predators. Marcus broke the silence. "I should go back to the condo, get some of his things. He'll want his phone, charger, maybe some clothes for later." Tyler nodded numbly. "His parents will be here in a few hours. His dad texted that they caught an earlier flight." "I'll stay," Ethan said, his voice hollow. He still wore his beach clothes, now stiff with dried salt water and Jake's blood. "Someone should be here when he wakes up." Officer Mike Daniels of the Myrtle Beach Police Department sat in his patrol car, completing his incident report. 23 years on the force, 12 of them patrolling these beaches, and this was only the second shark attack he'd responded to personally. The beach had been closed for a 1-mile stretch in either direction from the attack site. Red flags fluttered in the breeze, and beach patrol officers drove ATVs along the shoreline, warning any stragglers about the danger. News crews had already arrived, setting up cameras to capture footage of the empty beach for the evening broadcasts. Mike sighed, knowing what would follow. For a week, maybe two, tourists would avoid the water. Local businesses would suffer. Then, as memories faded and no further incidents occurred, people would return to their normal beach activities. It was the same cycle after every attack, every drowning, every tragedy. His radio crackled. "Officer Daniels, we've got Captain Ray Donovan at Beach Access 16, requesting to speak with the officer in charge of the shark incident." Mike frowned. Ray was known to everyone on beach patrol, a veteran charter captain with decades of experience in these waters. "Tell him I'm on my way." 5 minutes later, Mike found Ray standing next to his truck in the beach access parking lot, his weathered face grim. "Ray," Mike nodded in greeting. "You heard about the attack?" "Heard and not surprised," Ray replied, removing his cap to wipe sweat from his brow. "I called beach patrol yesterday about a bull shark sighting near that same sandbar. Female, about 7 feet. Mike's eyes narrowed. "I didn't see any report. Made it directly to Jimmy Stevens on patrol. Said he'd file it." Ray shook his head. "With all due respect to Jimmy, he's new. Might not have understood the significance. Bull sharks this close to shore, especially females, they're usually hunting." Mike pulled out his notepad. "Tell me exactly what you saw and when." Ray described his sighting from the previous afternoon, the shark's size, its behavior, the precise location. "Been fishing these waters my whole life," he concluded. "Something's off this season. The baitfish patterns are all wrong, pushing the bigger predators closer to shore." "You think it could be the same shark?" Ray shrugged. "Can't say for certain, but the timing and location make it likely. Bulls are territorial. They'll patrol the same feeding grounds for days, sometimes weeks." Mike made a few more notes, then closed his notepad. "I appreciate the information. Ray, I'll make sure it gets into the official report this time." "How's the kid doing?" Ray asked, his voice softening. "Last I heard, in surgery. Lost a lot of blood, but they think he'll make it." Ray nodded solemnly. "Good, that's good." He replaced his cap, adjusting it against the sun. "Tell Beach Patrol I'll be keeping my eyes open. If I spot that bull again, they'll know within minutes." As Ray drove away, Mike sat in his patrol car, adding the new information to his report. The sad truth was that predicting shark behavior was an inexact science at best. Despite Ray's sighting, despite the known presence of bull sharks in these waters, Closing the beaches preemptively would have been seen as an overreaction. Tourism was the lifeblood of Myrtle Beach, and the delicate balance between public safety and economic interests was one that local authorities navigated every day. Today, that balance had tipped tragically in the wrong direction for one young tourist. Jake's first sensation upon waking was pain, dull, throbbing pain that seemed to emanate from his entire body. His second was confusion, the rhythmic beeping of machines, the antiseptic smell, the uncomfortable bed. This wasn't the beach condo. Then memory returned in flashes. Waist-deep water, a fin, pressure around his leg, blood in the water. The shark. He tried to sit up, but found himself too weak to manage more than lifting his head slightly. An IV line ran into his arm, and various monitors were attached to his chest. His right leg, elevated on pillows, was heavily bandaged. "Jake, honey, can you hear me?" His mother's voice. Jake turned his head to see her sitting beside the bed, her face drawn with worry. His father stood behind her, one hand on her shoulder. "Mom?" His voice came out as a croak. Where am I?" "Grand Strand Medical Center," his father answered. "You've been in and out for about 12 hours now. Do you remember what happened?" Jake closed his eyes, trying to organize his scattered thoughts. "Shark," he said finally. "There was a shark." His mother squeezed his hand, tears welling in her eyes. "Yes, sweetheart. You were attacked by a shark. But you're going to be okay. The doctors said you were very lucky." Lucky. The word seemed absurd in context. Lucky would have been not encountering a shark at all. Lucky would have been still having 2 fully functional legs. "My leg?" he asked, afraid of the answer. His father stepped forward. "Still attached, which is the main thing. The surgeon said the damage was extensive but repairable. You'll need more surgeries and a lot of physical therapy, but—" He cleared his throat, emotion threatening to overwhelm him. "You're alive. Jake, that's what matters right now." Jake tried to process this information, but his mind felt foggy. Medications, probably. He became aware of a nurse checking his vital signs, adjusting something on one of the machines. "Dr. Chen will be in shortly," she told his parents. "She can explain everything in more detail." To Jake, she added, "Try to rest. Your body has, been through a tremendous trauma." Rest seemed impossible with the thoughts whirling through his mind. Would he walk normally again? Would he be able to return to college in the fall? How would he pay for what would undoubtedly be astronomical medical bills? As if reading his thoughts, his father said, "Don't worry about anything right now, Jake. We've contacted the insurance company. They're sending a case manager, and Coastal Carolina has been notified. They'll work with you on deferring next semester if necessary." Jake nodded, too exhausted to respond verbally. The pain medication was making it difficult to concentrate, pulling him back towards sleep despite his racing thoughts. "Your friends are here too," his mother added. "They've been in the waiting room since you were brought in. Ethan saved your life, you know. He went into the water to pull you out even though the shark was still there." This penetrated the fog in Jake's mind. Ethan had risked his life. Had the others been injured too? "Are they okay?" he managed to ask. "They're fine, just worried about you. Tyler called us and Marcus brought your things from the condo." She stroked his hair gently, a gesture from his childhood that now gave him an unexpected comfort. "They can visit later if you're feeling up to it." Jake's eyes grew heavier. The last thing he registered before drifting back to sleep was his father's voice, speaking not to him but to his mother. "We almost lost him, Carol. Our boy almost died today." By evening, news of the attack had spread throughout Myrtle Beach and beyond. Local television stations led their broadcasts with the story, complete with dramatic B-roll of red flags on an empty beach. The national networks picked it up as well, though relegated it to brief mentions. Shark attacks, while dramatic, were common enough during summer months to merit only passing attention unless fatal. At the Horry County Emergency Management Office, Director Patrick Walsh convened an impromptu meeting with representatives from Beach Patrol, local police and wildlife officials. The purpose, to determine their response to the incident. "We've closed the beaches for a 1-mile radius from the attack site," the Beach Patrol captain reported. "Standard procedure is to maintain closure for 24 hours, then reassess based on shark sightings." Patrick nodded. "And what are we seeing out there now?" A wildlife official consulted her notes. "No confirmed sightings since the attack. We've had 3 charter captains volunteer to patrol offshore, keeping an eye out. Coast Guard is aware but not actively involved at this point." What about the broader context? Patrick asked. Is this an isolated incident, or are we looking at unusual shark activity this season? This prompted an exchange of glances around the table. Finally, the marine biologist from Coastal Carolina University spoke up. There's been an uptick in bull shark sightings along the Grand Strand this spring. Water temperatures are 2 degrees above normal for June, and there's been disruption to typical baitfish patterns. There's meaning the conditions are favorable for sharks to venture closer to shore than usual. She hesitated. However, I want to emphasize that even with these factors, shark attacks remain extremely rare events. The victim was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. Patrick leaned back considering this information. As emergency management director, his job was to balance public safety with practical realities. Closing miles of beaches during peak tourist season was an economic blow to the community. But so was the perception that Myrtle Beach wasn't taking adequate safety precautions. Here's what we're going to do, he said finally. We maintain the current beach closure through tomorrow morning. Beach Patrol increases surveillance, with emphasis on the sandbar areas where the attack occurred. We issue a public statement acknowledging the incident, expressing sympathy for the victim, and reminding people of standard beach safety protocols. And after tomorrow? The police representative asked. If there are no further sightings, we reopen with yellow flags, medium hazard. We keep extra patrols on the water through the weekend. Patrick turned to the public information officer. Make sure our messaging is clear. This was an extremely rare event. Myrtle Beach remains one of the safest beach destinations in the country. As the meeting broke up, Patrick pulled aside the marine biologist. Off the record, Doctor? Should we be more concerned than we're letting on? She considered her response carefully. Bull sharks are among the most aggressive shark species, and they're perfectly adapted for hunting in shallow coastal waters. That said, millions of people swim in these waters every year without incident. She paused. What happened today was a terrible tragedy for that young man, but it doesn't represent an elevated threat to public safety in general. Patrick nodded, hoping she was right. In 30 years of emergency management, he'd learned that nature was ultimately unpredictable. All they could do was respond to events as they occurred and try to prevent further tragedies through education and vigilance. As he left the building, Patrick noticed a group of tourists walking toward the beach, towels and chairs in hand. Despite the news coverage, despite the red flags, people's desire to enjoy the ocean remained undiminished. Human nature, he reflected, could be just as predictable as the behavior of sharks. Jake's second awakening was clearer than the first. The medication had been adjusted, leaving him in more pain but with a sharper mind. Dr. Chen was examining his leg, her face professionally neutral as she checked the bandages. "How are you feeling, Jake?" she asked, noticing he was awake. "Like I got bit by a shark," he replied, attempting humor despite the pain. She smiled slightly. "Well, your sense of humor is intact, which is a good sign." More seriously, she added, "I want to explain your injuries and the treatment plan if you feel up to it." Jake nodded, bracing himself for bad news. "The bull shark's bite caused extensive damage to your right quadriceps muscle group and hamstrings. We repaired what we could in the initial surgery, but you'll need at least 2 more operations to address the muscular damage and eventual skin grafting." She paused. "The good news is that your femoral artery was spared, as were most major nerves. With proper rehabilitation, we expect you to regain significant function in the leg." "Significant, but not complete," Jake noted, reading between the lines. Dr. Chen met his gaze directly. "I won't sugarcoat this. You've suffered a traumatic injury that will have permanent effects. You'll likely walk with a limp, and certain activities may be challenging or impossible. However, given the nature of bull shark attacks, you're extraordinarily fortunate. Many victims lose limbs entirely or don't survive." Jake absorbed this information silently. At 19, the concept of permanent disability seemed abstract, almost unreal. He had been an active person, hiking, playing intramural basketball, planning to run a half marathon in the fall. Now those plans would need to be reconsidered, if not abandoned entirely. "When can I go home?" he asked finally. "Not for at least a week, possibly longer. We need to monitor for infection. Shark bites are notoriously prone to bacterial complications. After your next surgery, if all goes well, we can discuss transfer to a facility closer to your home for ongoing care." Jake's parents, who had been listening quietly, exchanged glances. "We've been researching rehabilitation centers," his father said. "There's a good one in Charlotte near our home." Dr. Chen nodded approvingly. "Recovery will be a marathon, not a sprint. You'll need a strong support system." After she left, Jake's mother helped him sit up slightly, adjusting pillows behind his back. "Your friends are still here," she said. "Would you like to see them? Just for a few minutes?" Jake hesitated, suddenly self-conscious about his condition. How would they look at him now, with pity, with the awkwardness that often accompanied tragedy? But they had saved his life, had been waiting hours to see him. He owed them at least that much. "Yeah," he said. "Send them in." Tyler entered first, followed by Ethan and Marcus. They stood awkwardly at the foot of the bed, clearly shocked by Jake's appearance despite trying to hide it. "You guys look terrible," Jake said, breaking the tension. "At least I have an excuse." This prompted nervous laughter, releasing some of the strain in the room. They moved closer, Tyler placing a hand gently on Jake's uninjured leg. "How are you feeling, man?" Marcus asked. "Like Jaws used my leg as a chew toy," Jake replied, maintaining the gallows humor that seemed to be his coping mechanism. "But I'll live, apparently. Might not be playing basketball with you guys anytime soon, though." "You never could keep up anyway," Ethan said, joining the banter while blinking back tears. "We'll find other things to do. Video game marathons. You can finally learn to play chess like you've been promising." Jake looked at Ethan, remembering what his mother had told him. "My mum said you pulled me out, that you went in the water even though the shark was still there." Ethan shrugged, uncomfortable with the attention. "I don't really remember deciding to do it. Just saw you bleeding and moved." "Thank you," Jake said simply. "I'd be dead if you hadn't." An awkward silence followed, none of them knowing quite how to acknowledge the enormity of what had happened. Finally, Tyler spoke. "We packed up the condo. Your stuff's in my car. We'll bring it to the hospital tomorrow." "You guys heading home?" Jake asked. "No way," Marcus answered immediately. "We're staying until you're stable enough for your parents to take over. Tyler's aunt lives in Conway. She's putting us up at her place." Jake felt a surge of gratitude for his friends, along with a twinge of guilt for ruining their vacation. "You don't have to—" "Shut up," Tyler interrupted. "Of course we're staying. That's not even a discussion." A nurse appeared in the doorway. "I'm sorry, but visiting hours are ending. Mr. Thompson needs his rest." The friends promised to return the next day, each giving Jake awkward but gentle pats on his uninjured leg or shoulder before leaving. As the door closed behind them, Jake felt tears welling up for the first time since the attack. Tears not of self-pity but of gratitude, for his survival, for his friends, for the chance, however altered, at a future. 10 miles offshore, the bull shark that had attacked Jake continued her relentless patrol of the coastal waters. The brief encounter with the human had been an anomaly in her hunting pattern, a mistake from an ecological perspective. Humans were not her natural prey, provided neither the caloric value nor the fat content she required. She had moved on immediately after the single exploratory bite, returning to her normal hunting behaviors. In the vastness of the ocean, this individual shark might never encounter another human swimmer. She might live another 20 years, growing larger and producing multiple litters of pups, without ever again being part of a human tragedy. For the shark, the attack had been insignificant, a momentary deviation from instinctual patterns. For Jake Thompson, it represented a permanent alteration to the trajectory of his life, a random intersection with nature's perfect predator that would forever mark him as one of the rare statistics, a shark attack survivor. The second day after, the attack brought a flurry of activity to Jake's hospital room. News outlets had picked up the story, and several had requested interviews. Jake's parents had declined on his behalf, establishing a protective barrier between their son and the media circus that often surrounded shark attack survivors. Local police and wildlife officials arrived to take Jake's statement about the incident, a formality, but one necessary for their records. Officer Mike Daniels sat beside Jake's bed, recording device in hand. "Just tell me what you remember in your own words," he said. "Any details about the shark, size, coloration, behavior, could be helpful." Jake recounted the experience as best he could, though certain portions remained hazy. "It was grayish-brown. I think. Not very long, nothing like the great whites you see in documentaries. Wider body, blunt nose." He shuddered slightly at the memory. "I didn't see it clearly until it had me underwater. Its eyes—" He paused. "They didn't look angry or anything. Just empty. Like it was just doing what it was made to do." Mike nodded, making notes. Based on your description and the bite pattern, our wildlife experts are confirming it was almost certainly a bull shark, probably female, around 7 feet in length. Was it still in the area after I was attacked? Jake asked. No confirmed sightings since the incident. These sharks typically don't stay in one location after an encounter like this. Mike hesitated. I should mention that we had a report of a bull shark in that area the day before your attack. A local charter captain spotted one near the sandbar. Jake's father, who had been listening quietly, straightened in his chair. Wait, are you saying someone reported a shark and the beaches weren't closed? Mike chose his words carefully. The report was made, but there was some administrative oversight. It didn't reach the appropriate channels for action. Administrative oversight, Jake's father repeated flatly. My son almost died because of an administrative oversight. Dad, it's okay, Jake intervened, not wanting the conversation to escalate. It wouldn't have made a difference. We got to the beach late the night before. Even if there had been warnings, we wouldn't have seen them. The officer appeared grateful for Jake's understanding. The beaches are currently reopened with yellow caution flags. We've increased patrol presence and spotters are monitoring the shoreline. After he left, Jake's father paced the small hospital room. There should be consequences, he muttered. Negligence like that. I don't want to sue anyone, Dad, Jake said firmly. It was a shark, not a faulty roller coaster or a drunk driver. Nature happens. His father stopped pacing, surprised by Jake's perspective. At 19, Jake had never been particularly philosophical, focused more on immediate pleasures and concerns than on accepting the random cruelties of existence. The attack seemed to have aged him overnight. We should still consult with a lawyer, his father insisted, just to understand our options. The medical bills alone, insurance will cover most of it, Jake's mother interjected. And we have savings. Let's focus on Jake's recovery for now. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Chen, accompanied by 2 colleagues. Jake, this is Dr. Patel, our plastic surgeon, and Dr. Rivera, orthopedic specialist. They'll be joining me for your next surgery tomorrow morning. The doctors explained the procedure in detail, how they would further clean and repair the damaged muscle tissue, assess the need for tendon grafts, and prepare the wound for eventual skin grafting. The technical language washed over Jake, who found himself detaching emotionally from the discussion of his own body, as if they were describing repairs to a machine rather than to his flesh and blood. Do you have any questions? Dr. Rivera asked when they finished. Jake had dozens but settled on the most pressing. When will I know if I can walk normally again? The doctors exchanged glances. We won't know the full extent of permanent functional limitations for several months, Dr. Rivera answered honestly. Initial physical therapy will begin while you're still hospitalized, but the intensive rehabilitation process will continue for at least a year. A year. Jake tried to process this time frame. A year ago, he had been finishing his freshman year of college, looking forward to a summer internship, certain about his path forward. Now that certainty had been replaced by an expanse of unknowns, medical procedures, physical therapy, adaptation to a new normal he couldn't yet envision. After the doctors left, Jake's parents tried to maintain positive conversation, discussing plans for his transfer to Charlotte after stabilization, the messages of support pouring in from extended family and friends, the courses he might be able to take online while recovering. Jake participated minimally, exhaustion from his injuries, and the emotional toll of the past 2 days catching up with him. When they finally left for dinner, promising to return later, Jake found himself alone for the first time since the attack. The hospital room fell quiet except for the steady beeping of monitors. He reached for his phone, scrolling through dozens of text messages and social media notifications, most expressing shock and sympathy. One message stood out, from Emma, the girl from his economics class whom he'd mentioned to Ethan during those terrifying moments on the beach. How had she heard? University grapevine, most likely. Jake, I just heard what happened. I'm so sorry. Please let me know if there's anything I can do. Thinking of you and sending healing vibes your way. Emma. He stared at the message, unsure how to respond. Before the attack, he would have been elated to receive any communication from her. Now it felt like a message from another life, a life where his biggest concern had been working up the courage to ask a pretty girl on a date, not whether he would walk unassisted again. Jake set the phone aside without replying. He would respond later, when he had more emotional energy. when he had figured out who he was now in the aftermath of those few seconds that had changed everything. Outside his window, the sun was setting, over Myrtle Beach, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Somewhere out there, people were continuing their vacations, swimming in the same waters that had nearly claimed his life. The thought didn't make Jake angry or bitter, just contemplative about the thin margins between ordinary life and extraordinary tragedy, and how quickly one could become the other. So the next morning brought Jake's second surgery. As the anesthesiologist administered medication that would soon render him unconscious, Jake found himself thinking of the shark. Was it still out there, patrolling the sandbar? Had it moved on to other hunting grounds? Would it ever encounter another human, create another story like his? These thoughts dissolved as the anesthesia took effect, plunging Jake into dreamless darkness. Hours later, he awoke in the recovery room, groggy and disoriented. The surgery had gone well, Dr. Chen informed him when he was alert enough to comprehend. The muscle damage had been extensive but repairable. They had removed more necrotic tissue, implanted a temporary antibiotic-impregnated spacer to prevent infection, and taken measurements for the eventual skin grafting procedure. "You're looking at one more major surgery before transfer," she explained. "Probably in 3 to 4 days, depending on how you heal." Jake nodded, still too affected by anesthesia and pain medication to fully process the information. He drifted in and out of consciousness throughout the day, vaguely aware of his parents and friends visiting, of nurses checking his vital signs, of the persistent pain emanating from his right leg, despite the medications flowing through his IV. By evening, he was more lucid, able to watch television and engage in conversation with his mother, who had remained at his bedside while his father returned to their hotel to make calls and arrangements for Jake's eventual transfer to Charlotte. "There's someone from the Shark Research Institute who'd like to speak with you," she mentioned, scrolling through emails on her phone. "They're compiling data on shark encounters along the East Coast. Your father told them maybe later, when you're feeling stronger." Jake considered this. "I wouldn't mind talking to them, actually. Might help to understand what happened from a scientific perspective." His mother looked up, surprised. "You sure? There's no rush. I'm going to be telling this story for the rest of my life, Mom. Might as well get the facts straight." He attempted a smile. "Besides, not many people can say they've had a close encounter with a bull shark and lived to talk about it." She studied him for a moment, perhaps recognizing this as another step in his psychological processing of the trauma. "I'll let them know you're willing to speak with them when you're a bit further along in recovery." The conversation shifted to practical matters. The logistics of transferring medical records, the search for a suitable rehabilitation facility. In Charlotte, the academic accommodations Coastal Carolina University might make for his situation. Jake participated actively in these discussions, surprising his mother with his maturity and pragmatism. "You know," she said finally, "when you were little, you used to be terrified of the deep end of the swimming pool. You'd stand at the edge, wanting to jump, but too scared to try. Your father and I would coax you, promise to catch you, but you'd always back away at the last moment." Jake remembered those early swimming lessons vaguely. "What changed?" "One day, you just jumped. No warning, no hesitation. When we asked why, you said, 'I got tired of being scared.'" She squeezed his hand. "You've always been braver than you think, Jake. This is going to be hard, harder than anything you've faced before, but you'll find that courage again." Jake wasn't so certain. Childhood fears of swimming pools seemed trivial compared to the challenges that now lay before him, but he nodded, unwilling to dampen his mother's optimism with his own doubts and fears. Outside his window, the moon cast silver light on the ocean's surface. Somewhere beneath those seemingly peaceful waters, predators continued their ancient patterns, hunting and killing as they had for millions of years before humans ever set foot on beaches or ventured into their domain. Jake found himself wondering if the shark that had attacked him was still out there, its primitive brain already having forgotten the brief encounter that had irrevocably altered a human life. The shark had indeed moved on. Driven by instinct and the eternal search for prey, she had traveled south along the coastline, following the warm Gulf Stream currents that carried schools of fish. She would continue this pattern through the summer months, perhaps venturing into the inlets and estuaries that provided rich hunting grounds. By winter, she would move to deeper, warmer waters offshore, joining other bull sharks in their seasonal migration patterns. In spring, she might return to the coastal waters of South Carolina, or continue south to Florida's abundant lagoons and bays. If she survived the many threats that even apex predators faced, larger sharks, fishing vessels, habitat destruction, she might live another 20 years, growing larger and producing multiple litters of pups. She would never know that her single exploratory bite had fundamentally altered a human life, had created ripples that would spread outward through Jake's family, friends, and community. In the vastness of the ocean, such encounters represented anomalies, statistical rarities that nonetheless loomed large in human consciousness and culture. 3 days after his second surgery, Jake received a visitor, Dr. Monica Wilkins, from the Coastal Carolina Marine Biology Department. She had been working with the Shark Research Institute, documenting shark activity along the Grand Strand, and had requested to interview Jake about his encounter. "First, let me say how sorry I am about what happened to you," she began, setting up a small recording device with Jake's permission. "Shark attacks are incredibly rare events, but that's small comfort when you're one of the statistics." Jake nodded, appreciating her straightforward approach. "My mom said you're researching shark behavior." "Yes, specifically bull shark populations along the Carolina coast. They're unique among shark species in their ability to tolerate fresh water, which brings them into more frequent contact with humans than other large sharks." She consulted her notes. "Based on the description you gave police and the bite pattern documented by your medical team, we're confident your encounter was with a female bull shark, approximately 7 feet in length." "Why did it attack me?" Jake asked, the question that had been haunting him since he'd awoken in the hospital. "I wasn't splashing around or bleeding, or anything that's supposed to attract sharks." Dr. Wilkins considered her response carefully. "Bull sharks, more than most species, are known for what we call exploratory bites. They have poor vision but excellent electroreceptors that detect the electrical impulses generated by all living creatures. In murky water, especially along sandbars where visibility is limited, they sometimes bite to investigate potential prey. So I was just mistaken for something else." "Essentially, yes. Sharks don't hunt humans deliberately. We're not part of their natural diet. Most attacks, including yours, involve a single bite followed by the shark's immediate departure. Once they realize you're not their preferred prey, they typically move on." Jake absorbed this information, finding a strange comfort in the randomness of it all. The shark hadn't singled him out or acted with malice. It had simply been following millions of years of evolutionary programming, investigating a potential food source in its territory. "We've documented increased bull shark activity in your attack area this season," Dr. Wilkins continued. "Water temperatures are above normal, and baitfish patterns have been disrupted, possibly due to climate change effects. This has brought larger predators closer to shore than usual." "Could this happen to someone else?" Jake asked, suddenly concerned about other swimmers. "It's possible, but still extremely unlikely. The odds of a shark attack are roughly 1 in 11.5 million. You're more likely to be killed by a vending machine or lightning strike." She paused. "That said, we're working with local authorities to improve early warning systems for shark sightings and educate the public about risk factors." They talked for nearly an hour, Jake describing his experience in detail while Dr. Wilkins recorded and took notes. She explained bull shark biology, behavior patterns, and the research being done to better understand and predict their movements along populated coastlines. "Your account will be valuable for our database," she said, as she prepared to leave. "The more we understand about these encounters, the better we can prevent them in the future." "Will my attack be in a research paper or something?" Jake asked. "With your permission, yes, anonymized, of course." She hesitated. Many survivors find it helpful to contextualize their experience within the broader scientific understanding. It can provide a framework for processing the trauma. Jake nodded thoughtfully. "I'd like to read it when it's published." After Dr. Wilkins left, Jake's father arrived with news. The arrangements for transfer to Charlotte had been finalized. After his final surgery at Grand Strand Medical, scheduled for the following day, Jake would be transported by medical transport to a rehabilitation center near their home, where he would begin the long process of physical therapy and recovery. "Your mother's driving home now to prepare the house," he explained. "We'll convert the downstairs guest room into a bedroom for you temporarily until you can handle stairs again." The practical reality of his new limitations hit Jake anew. Their family home, a 2-story colonial in a Charlotte suburb, had all bedrooms on the second floor. He'd need to relearn basic mobility before he could even access his own room. "How long will I be in rehab?" he asked. "Initial inpatient stay will be about 3 weeks. After that, outpatient therapy 3 times a week for, well, we'll see how it goes." His father squeezed his shoulder. "One step at a time, Jake. Literally and figuratively. One step at a time." It seemed both a cruel metaphor and the only possible approach to the months that lay ahead. Jake tried to imagine his future self, walking with a cane perhaps, or with a pronounced limp scarred in body if not in spirit. "What about college?" he asked, voicing another concern that had been nagging at him. "I spoke with the dean yesterday. They're very supportive, very accommodating. You can defer a semester if needed, or take a reduced course load online while you recover." His father smiled encouragingly. "Your education isn't going anywhere, Jake. It'll wait for you." But would anything else wait? Would Emma from economics class still be interested in the scarred, limping version of Jake Thompson? Would his basketball teammates welcome him back, even if only to sit on the bench? Would future employers see past his disability to his abilities? These questions remained unspoken, too overwhelming to contemplate when he was still struggling with the immediate challenges of pain management and basic mobility. As evening fell, Jake's friends arrived for what would likely be their final visit before his transfer to Charlotte. They brought contraband food, burgers from a local beachside grill that Jake had mentioned wanting to try before the attack, and a light-heartedness that had been missing from his hospital room. "We made a pact," Tyler announced as they settled into chairs around Jake's bed. "We're coming to Charlotte for Thanksgiving break to see you. Non-negotiable. And we're setting up a weekly game night online," Marcus added. "Ethan's terrible at Fortnite, but we'll carry him for your sake." "Speak for yourself," Ethan retorted. "I was letting you win out of pity." Jake felt a rush of gratitude for their determined normalcy, their refusal to treat him differently despite the dramatic change in circumstances. They didn't avoid mentioning the attack. In fact, they asked detailed questions about the shock, the surgeries, the expected recovery process, but they did so without the awkward pity he had begun to recognize in others' expressions. "You know," Ethan said thoughtfully, taking a bite of his burger, "in some cultures, surviving a shark attack would make you, like, a total badass. You could probably start a cult if you wanted to." Jake laughed, his first genuine laugh since the attack. "I'll keep that as plan B if physical therapy doesn't work out." As his friends eventually departed with promises to call, text, and video chat regularly, Jake felt a complex mixture of emotions. Sadness at leaving them and the carefree life they represented. Anxiety about the challenging road ahead. But also a strange growing acceptance of his new reality. Not resignation, but a determination to navigate whatever came next with the same resilience that had kept him fighting in those blood-filled waters. The final surgery at Grand Strand Medical Center took place on the 5th day after the attack. This procedure focused on preparing Jake's wounds for eventual skin grafting, which would be completed at the Rehabilitation Center in Charlotte. Dr. Chen and her team removed the temporary antibiotic spacer, confirmed the absence of infection, and applied specialized wound dressings designed to promote healing. When Jake awoke in recovery, Dr. Chen was there to review the results. "The surgery went extremely well," she informed him. "The tissue is showing excellent healing with no signs of infection. You're medically stable for transfer tomorrow morning." "Thank you," Jake said, genuinely grateful for her skilled care. "For everything." "You were an extraordinary patient under extraordinarily difficult circumstances," she replied. "I've treated shark attack victims before, but few have shown your level of resilience and positive attitude." Jake wasn't sure he deserved this praise. His positive attitude had been intermittent at best, but he appreciated the sentiment. "Will I ever be able to go in the ocean again?" he asked suddenly, surprising himself with the question. "Doctor." Chen considered this carefully. "Medically speaking, once you're fully healed and have regained sufficient strength and mobility, there's no reason you couldn't. The psychological barriers might be more challenging than the physical ones." Jake nodded, unsure why he had even asked. The thought of entering ocean water again seemed simultaneously terrifying and necessary, a future hurdle he would eventually need to face, though not anytime soon. "One last thing," Dr. Chen said, reaching into her pocket. "The surgical team preserved this for you, if you want it. Some survivors find it helpful for closure." She handed him a small plastic container. Inside was a shark tooth, triangular, serrated, about an inch long. It had been embedded in his thigh muscle, overlooked during the initial emergency surgery. In the chaos of stopping the bleeding and saving his life, Jake stared at it, mesmerized. This small piece of calcified tissue had been part of the creature that had nearly killed him, had permanently altered his life's trajectory. He should hate it, fear it. Instead, he felt an odd sense of connection to it, to the ancient predator from which it had come, to the vast ocean ecosystem it represented. "I'll keep it," he said finally. "It's part of my story now." The next morning, Jake was carefully transferred from his hospital bed to a gurney, then to the medical transport vehicle that would take him to Charlotte. His father would follow, in his car, while his friends had already departed for campus, promising to visit him in Charlotte soon. As the transport pulled away from Grand Strand Medical Center, Jake caught a final glimpse of the ocean through the vehicle's window, a flash of blue on the horizon, beautiful and terrible in its vastness and power. In that moment, he understood that his relationship with the natural world had been fundamentally altered. He would never again take for granted the wild forces that existed just beyond the thin veneer of human civilization, forces that operated according to ancient laws of survival rather than human concepts of fairness or justice. The bull shark that had attacked him was neither villain nor monster, simply a predator doing what evolution had designed it to do. The randomness of their encounter had been neither punishment nor test of character. It had simply been an intersection of two different worlds, resulting in consequences that Jake would carry with him for the remainder of his life. As Myrtle Beach receded in the distance, Jake closed his eyes, the shark tooth secure in his pocket. Ahead lay months of painful physical therapy, adaptation to new limitations, and the gradual forging of a new identity as someone marked, literally and figuratively, by an encounter with one of nature's perfect predators. Behind lay the carefree 19-year-old who had waded into the Atlantic on a perfect June morning, unaware that his life was about to change forever. The tooth would remain with him through the years that followed, a talisman, a reminder, a connection to the vast and indifferent natural world that had briefly touched his life with tooth and fin and power, leaving him forever changed, but also somehow more fully alive in his awareness of life's fragility and preciousness. And somewhere in the Atlantic, the bull shark continued her ancient patterns, unaware of the human drama she had set in motion with a single exploratory bite, swimming through waters her species had dominated for millions of years before humans ever built their cities along the shore, waters they would continue to patrol long after the memory of Jake Thompson's encounter had faded from human consciousness.